Welcome to NIJC's Justice and Java series, How Attorneys and Asylum Seekers Can Obtain Protection in a Pandemic. My name is Ashley Huebner, and I'm an Associate Director of Legal Services at the National Immigrant Justice Center, overseeing our asylum and children's programs. We're excited to devote today's Justice and Java presentation to a discussion with three fantastic NIJC pro bono attorneys who successfully represented asylum seekers this summer in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. If you've been keeping an eye on the immigration world this summer, you'll know that the administration has ramped up its attacks on the U.S. asylum system while simultaneously taking steps, or in some cases refusing to take steps, that have led to the further breakdown of the immigration court system. We know that with all this chaos, the idea of becoming an NIJC pro bono attorney and beginning to work on an asylum matter may feel overwhelming. Today's panelists are here to share that it is not only possible to successfully represent an asylum seeker during COVID-19 and while mainly working remotely, but that representation for asylum seekers is more critical now than ever. We'll also hear from an asylum seeker that two of the panelists represented, and we'll hear about how you can get more involved in these issues and become an NIJC pro bono attorney. Very quickly, some background about NIJC. At NIJC, we provide comprehensive legal services to low-income detained and non-detained immigrants, and we utilize the information we gain from our direct client work to inform our policy, advocacy, and impact litigation work across the country. And we accomplish all of this through the support of our fantastic pro bono attorneys, like the pro bono attorneys you're going to hear from today. Through all of our work with detained and non-detained immigrants over the past 6 months, we've gotten a very good idea of how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted our immigration system. So in about mid-March, around the time that Chicago issued its shelter-in-place order, we saw both USCIS and the immigration courts shut down some of their services. So for example, in about mid-March, we saw USCIS suspend some of its in-person services, meaning interviews could not proceed, but U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service would continue receiving filings, and filing deadlines would remain in place. Likewise, we also saw the immigration court suspend its non-detained hearings, both status hearings and merits hearings. At the same time, detained hearings continued, and the court remained open, meaning that filings were still due and could be submitted to the court. In about June, we saw that USCIS resume its in-person services first. Interviews began again, but how those interviews proceeded differed tremendously depending on individual offices and what part of the country the office was located in. Likewise, the resumption of non-detained immigration court hearings has also differed tremendously across the country, depending on where the court is located and the COVID-19 situation that existed at that particular time. So for example, in July of 2020, the Chicago Immigration Court began rehearing non-detained merits hearings. However, master calendar status hearings remain suspended and continue to be suspended today. So this has left us with a fairly discombobulated system at the Immigration Court and at the Asylum Office. Today, the Asylum Office is theoretically conducting interviews, but we've had very few scheduled since the Asylum Office and USCIS reopened. At the Immigration Court, no non-detained master calendar hearings are proceeding, but this theoretically could change at any time. Non-detained and detained merits hearings are proceeding, but because the non-detained judges are working staggered schedules, hearings are being rescheduled and canceled, sometimes with very little notice to the attorneys, and often after much hearing preparation has already occurred. Additionally, the Chicago Immigration Court and other courts across the country are closing unexpectedly with little notice to attorneys and with little information as to the reason for the closure or when the court may reopen due to the restriction on information being shared that the Department of Justice has instituted. The result of all of this has been an increase in substantial backlogs in immigration court hearings and asylum office interviews. As you'll see on the chart here, going into 2020, there was already a substantial backlog of immigration court cases. But as we went into the COVID-19 closures, we saw a dramatic decrease in the number of immigration court cases that are being completed. We've seen a plethora in the issuance of standing orders from immigration judges about how they want procedures to move forward in their cases during this particular time. And we've seen a real problem in our ability to access information from the immigration court, relying on this website that you can see here below to show which courts are open, what parts of the courts are open, when they're going to be closed, and how we might expect to hear from them again. So with all of this in mind, we're going to move into our Q&A with our panelists today. We are very fortunate today to be joined by Lisa Haidostian and Neha Khandhadia of McDermott, Will and Emery. They recently obtained withholding of removal for an asylum seeker from Honduras after appearing before the Chicago Immigration Court in August. And we'll also be joined by Nick Hidalgo of Jones Day, who recently obtained asylum for an Ethiopian family who appeared before the Chicago Asylum Office right after it reopened in June. So Lisa, Neha, and Nick, if you can turn on your cameras now and we'll get started. All right. So to the audience, if you have any questions during this time, please don't hesitate to include questions in the question box and we'll try to cover them as we go through. All right, so we'd first like to hear a little bit from all of you as to why you decided to get involved in an asylum matter and a little bit about your case. Nick, could you get us started?
Absolutely. So I've sort of always been interested in asylum law. I was involved in a clinic in law school. And then when I started at Jones Day, actually in the DC office, the firm was just ramping up what we called our Laredo project, where basically we were sending a ton of attorneys down to the border and representing clients who were seeking asylum down there. Then when I came to the Chicago office a few years ago, I was looking for more opportunity to get involved in the pro bono practice in the Chicago office, and touched base with a partner who needed help picking up the slack on this case. I'm not the first associate to help out this family, but I picked up when someone went in-house, and so I got involved a little later. But yeah, that's why I joined.
And can you tell us a little bit about your clients while protecting their confidentiality?
Of course. So my clients are a family from Ethiopia who were fleeing political persecution. Their story is absolutely horrendous, and because I got involved late, I had to I had a lot of paperwork to read. I didn't do the initial interviews, but then had several afterwards to really get down into the details of some of the harder to hear stuff. But yeah, so they left Ethiopia in 2016, applied for asylum right away, but because of the shifting priorities at USCIS, they didn't have an interview date until June of 2020, and that was after applying to be on a short waiting list, a short notice list. So, over 3 years without really any word on an interview, but thankfully we were able to finally get them one.
Thanks, Nick. Neha and Lisa, how about you? How did you decide to get involved, and can you tell us a little bit about your case?
Yeah, so I'll get started. So I have been, as long as I've been at the firm, been involved in any pro bono matters related to immigration issues. I've had a chance to write amicus briefs, and this was just sort of the next step in being able to help out individuals in this situation. So I got started by attending one of Nijc's trainings, and that sort of allowed me to move in to start helping these people. So I have another case going on right now as well. But the client we represented during this pandemic is a mother of 3 who escaped her country of origin due to gang violence. The gang specifically targeted her oldest daughter to become one of their gang girlfriends. And she did everything she could to protect her daughter. And, it got to the point, things escalated, and she was threatened at gunpoint herself. And so she fled the country and sort of has been in this immigration machine for the past 4 or 5 years, including having a horrible experience in a merits hearing in Arizona. So we were really happy that we were able to right the ship for her and help her out here.
Thanks. Lisa, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I do actually. So I'll say that this was my first asylum case, and I've been at the firm for almost 8 years now and closely involved in the pro bono program. I've always just really supported NIJC's work, but I've never been involved in a case because I always thought, well, I don't know how to do asylum cases. You know, it seems scary. I don't know how to do it. But then this summer, finally, I was like, you know, I want to get involved. I want to do one of these cases. And it's been a really great experience. And NIJC has been so helpful along the way. And they really are the subject matter experts. And, you know, once you pick it up, it kind of makes sense. So that would be my short plug to, even if you're scared about, like, you know, I don't know asylum law, I don't know how this works. It's you know, with the guidance of NIJC along the way, it's a great experience.
Thanks, that's great to hear. Well, so what we want to talk about specifically is how COVID impacted your work. So when COVID hit and your firms went remote, you began working from home or elsewhere, not in your offices, how did that affect your interaction with your clients? Nick, do you want to go first?
Sure thing. So as I said, luckily, when I started working with these clients, it was before COVID hit. So I was able to do a few interviews with them and really hammer out most of the details of their affidavits and their briefing and everything. When COVID hit, we continued to have phone interviews, but obviously it's a lot more challenging to talk about really emotionally weighty stuff on the phone, and in this case with an interpreter. You know, my clients still speak fairly good English, but they wanted to speak in Amharic in order to fully express what they've been through. And so, yeah, that was challenging. I'll say, luckily, we had a lot of it already done. I actually think my case may have been the rare one where the pandemic actually helped us get an interview date earlier, just because no one else, I mean, as you said, we were one of the first interviews after the USCIS office reopened in Chicago. And, you know, we applied to be on the short waiting list without really much expectation of it going forward. And luckily, we were able to get one. But I mean, basically, the pandemic affected interviewing, you know, speaking with my clients and working with my clients in all the ways you'd expect. Everyone is sort of working remote now. And, you know, we had Zoom meetings and everything. And thankfully, my clients were very proficient at it. So it wasn't too much of a struggle.
That's good to hear. Neha and Lisa, how about you?
Yeah, so our client is actually not in the Chicagoland area. So we were able to transition up to Zoom pretty effectively with her. We had met her only once before in person. So luckily the foundation was there, but with an interpreter via Zoom, I really don't think we missed a beat. It actually, I think, made things a lot more efficient. We were able to get our other affidavits pretty efficiently done as well, all through Zoom.
And the only thing I'll add to that is one thing that was actually nice about meeting through Zoom is we were able to plan the meetings at times that actually were a little bit unorthodox, but worked for our group. So we had some calls that were at like 7 p.m. or so, which I don't think we would ever plan an in-person meeting at that time, but it worked for everyone. And so we were actually able to, you know, accommodate schedules a little bit better through Zoom.
So it sounds like the technology worked really well for all of you in communicating with your clients. Were there any technology hiccups while you were preparing the case, or anything that surprised you about the technology you were using to communicate with your clients?
There was a little bit of that clunkiness that you know, there were times when, you know, our client had to call in her teenager to help her out with something. But I don't, as far as the preparation goes, I don't recall any major hiccups. Neha, do you?
I would agree with that. I think it was pretty seamless.
Same here, actually surprisingly easy. I was really worried when the pandemic hit that it would impact our representation a lot more than it did.
That's great. That's really great to hear. So did you, before your interview and before your merits hearings, did either of you do any in-person prep, or was all your prep conducted over Zoom and over the phone?
So everything
totally
was Zoom.
Zoom.
I was actually really lucky that we were thinking about applying for this short notice list in the winter and early spring before things got really bad. So I think we had our last in-person meeting early March, like right before the city just shut down completely. Did have a couple, like I said, afterwards, but the foundation was already there for us, thankfully.
Okay, that's great. Well, so let's get into the nitty gritty of what it was like to actually go into the interview or the merits hearing. So Nick, tell us about the procedures at the asylum office. What was it like, you know, getting your documents to the asylum office, walking into the asylum office?
So they actually didn't need any documents from me. I mean, identification and everything, but I went into the one time I've been into the Jones Day office this whole pandemic was to go in and print everything in anticipation of our interview. And of course I get there and they never need to look at it because we sent everything electronically beforehand. And I wasn't expecting that because I had another similar interview actually when I was in the DC office in the Arlington asylum office, and they did require all this paperwork. But anyway, so no paperwork was actually required. When we got there, I was unsure if it was open because we were the only people in it felt like in the building, much less on the floor where the office actually was. So everyone showed up, the whole family. It's a family of 4, an interpreter. We were all wearing masks. You know, we got into went through security. The office itself, the waiting room, they had like they had like cordoned off parts of it so that, you know, people, if it was full, people would still be socially distanced. But again, we saw one other interviewer in the entire time we were there, and we were there for several hours. So, you know, it was, most of it was pretty typical. You know, we went up, presented our information, we waited for a while, but the interview itself was interesting because while we were all allowed to be in the same room, I think 6 of us at first, me, the family, and the interpreter, the interviewer was actually on a tablet on the desk. Probably just like 3 or 4 doors down, but they, you know, out of safety precaution, they were not in the same room. That was mostly okay, but the audio did cut out a couple times. Not too bad. We were able to go back and testify again or give the interview again. We also had to, since we were giving the interview in Amharic, we had I forget what the official name is, but another translator on the phone just to verify our interpreter. And there were some hiccups there just with catching certain things. So there were a couple extra interruptions that I think maybe wouldn't have happened without the technology. And then the last thing I'll say is that everyone was wearing masks, and the father of the family had been through a lot of really traumatic abuse from the government. And he started crying during part of the interview. And I mean, what happens when you cry? Like, obviously, he had issues with his mask, and you know, we basically had to take a 5-minute break just so my client could, you know, breathe and pull himself together. And you know, I had to step out because he needed to take off his mask and sort of just like wash his face a little bit. So that was another part that was a little bit, you know, that was another hurdle we had to overcome. But overall, the procedure was pretty seamless, and I thought we were able to still give a really good interview.
So I know for a lot of attorneys who are used to prepping their clients for these interviews and knowing the importance of demeanor and clear testimony, did you feel like the mask or the tablet inhibited the asylum officer's ability to see your client's demeanor, to, you know, get a clear picture of what they were saying?
I mean, I'm sure it did to some extent, just because, you know, in-person communication is always going to be, you're always going to pick up more cues, be able to tell the reliability of someone. But my client sat in the like dead center of the camera screen, the interpreter just to one side and me to the other. And the interviewer seemed really focused on my client, the primary speaker, of course. And you know, we got a positive result. So I guess she was able to test his reliability enough. But you know, of course, there will always be certain things that you can't communicate quite as well. But I thought it worked well enough.
That's really good to hear. Neha and Lisa, let's hear about your situation at court. So did you have to do anything differently to file your materials when you physically entered the court building?
Yeah, so from a filing perspective, I don't think it was really anything different. Unfortunately, the Court of Immigration in Chicago, they're only allowing quote unquote e-filings or email filings for documents that are 50 pages and under. So we had to go in. So similar to Nick, the only time I went into the McDermott office was to get everything printed for this filing, and then just walked it over. Other than that, I think it was pretty straightforward. Went up to the window, everybody had masks on and everything. The court has sort of a one-way path laid out. So, you know, markers on the floor telling you what direction you should be in, how far you should be from the person in front of you. So logistically speaking, you know, I think it's about what you'd expect to be there during the pandemic. And then in terms of the actual filing, nothing really out of the ordinary.
And what about then when you got into the courtroom itself? What was the setup like there?
Yeah, so I'll give a little bit and then I'll give it over to Lisa on that. There were some requirements for how many people can be in the courtroom at one time. I think this is where, to Ashley, your earlier question about technology issues, this is where I think we saw them. And it ended up being fine, but the judge was there in person, but the attorney for the government as well as the interpreter were both appearing via telephone. And so, you know, in terms of how everyone was spaced out, there was social distancing. There's, you know, the benches are taped off, so only one person can sit in each. So our client's family was there, so everybody was sort of spaced out. We also had our interpreter there as well. And the procedure we set up with the judge was, Judge, because of technology, you know, she may not be able to hear everything our client says. Can our interpreter sort of flag that for us, or can we object? And so the procedure she came up with was to say objection, translation, and then essentially have the government attorney or me repeat the question and have our client re-answer the question and have it reinterpreted. You know, I think there were some other challenges with that. Sometimes the interpreter would start speaking before our client finished answering. But I think with that procedure in place, it ended up being.
And Lisa, did you all have to wear masks during this whole time, even when your client was testifying?
Yeah, we were wearing masks the whole time, and we were spaced different. Like, we weren't sitting at the table with our client, actually. She was at one table, and then, you know, we were spaced out at other tables. The only thing I'll add to what Neha said was that at least our judge took seriously the limit of people in the courtroom, and we actually had a little, or at least I did, a heart stoppage at one second, because we had actually carefully planned who was going to come, because not everyone, you know, normally we would have had more people attend, but we were being mindful of the restriction. And the judge actually said, you know, we have too many people in the courtroom right now. And we're like looking around like, oh my gosh, did we miscount? But you know, in fact, we were one under, so we were okay. But just a reminder to be mindful of whatever the judge's requirement is. In our case, it was 10 people and there are signs posted. So at least our judge was taking that restriction quite seriously.
That's good. Well, so I know, similar to the question I asked Nick, you know, demeanor is so important, credibility is so important in these cases, and when you wear a mask, it can be just so difficult to see your facial expressions. Did you see any impact on your client's testimony or your client's ability to express herself during court while wearing a mask?
Honestly, I thought she did fantastic. I think I don't, you know, similar to what Nick said, I think, of course, if half your face is blocked, there's going to be something lost there. But you know, I think a couple of things to keep in mind. Number one, just try to stress to your client, like, you know, if there's ever a time for eye contact, it's now, because it's the best way you can communicate with the judge. Our judge was super engaged the entire time. And then you know, direct examination 101 thing to again stress here, you know, now more than ever is, you know, have your client face the judge, you know, when she's answering your question, as opposed to facing you, which can be you know, instinct. But you know, we just try to focus on both those things to sort of help compensate for the fact that it might be a little bit trickier to understand her or kind of glean expression from her face considering the mask. But we didn't, I mean, I thought it worked fine. I didn't think that too much was lost from the masks.
That's great to hear. Well, so how did you all feel about the safety procedures overall? I know for those of us who are in immigration court regularly, you know, you often go to court and it's packed with 50, 60 people. And, you know, the idea of being in that kind of environment right now could be fairly frightening for some people. So Did you feel comfortable? Did you feel safe? Were there things you wished the asylum office or the immigration court had done differently?
I think,
So I can jump in. Go ahead, Neha.
No, I think for us, there weren't a lot of people there, which was really helpful. And I think that does seem to be by design. Like when I had gone for the filing a couple weeks before, that it was also fairly empty. How they've cordoned off so many chairs within the immigration sort of waiting area that would normally be filled with people. That I think it appears to be by design that they're limiting the people in the space, which I think helped a lot for me.
That's all. It was like empty. It was almost completely empty in there. So it, you know, we were far away from the judge and everyone, and you know, the staff that was there, I think, was mindful of keeping distance. So you know, I didn't have particular concerns from a safety perspective at the court.
Same thing with the asylum office. You know, there was no one there. There were, you know, seats that no one could sit in, so that we were socially distancing. They had new plastic screens up for the officers, so when I was handing in the passports and stuff, there was a screen there. I was actually given an option to sit in a separate room from my clients, so that there would be three different people on the Zoom call, but I opted not to. But that option is there if you're concerned about that. So yes, the rooms are a little small, so the clients are all packed in together, but given that they're usually family, that's a risk they're probably already taking. And like I said, we were in a separate room from the interviewer, so I thought it was overall pretty good.
That's great. Well, after having gone through this experience in a pandemic, is there anything you wished you would have known in advance in terms of preparation or in terms of things you would have done differently after having gone through the interview or gone through the hearing?
Maybe done an interview with my client in person while we're in masks, just so he could get used to that. But like I said, I think he did a pretty good job. And then just, you know, always the knowledge would be nice that this short notice interview list that I've referenced a few times, that actually really worked. You know, as I said, my client was so anxious to get asylum, and he's been here for 3 years, you know, and that's kind of how it goes with the affirmative process. You know, the interviews are, you know, it's impossible to guarantee when you're going to get an interview. But just to know that this process works, we probably would have applied earlier. Whether we would have gotten an interview earlier, or if it was because so many people canceled because of COVID-19 that we were able to get one, I'll never know. But that's something I would probably do differently.
And Lisa?
Yeah,
I mean, I think just we had a couple hiccups with the court, and as far as like getting wrong information from the court and things like that. And my sense, I don't know, is that some issues there are heightened during this time, and there's confusion and stuff. So I guess, like, you know, building more time in for things and really keeping the lines of communication with the court really open during this time, when, you know, there would be, I would say maybe twice a week, we'd get some email that the court was closed, and we had no notice of that, and we received conflicting information. So there were things like that I guess if we were doing it over again, I would be, you know, in contact with the court more, and just kind of had a heightened awareness of what's going on over there.
that's exactly what I was going to say. There were definitely some hair-raising moments because the court was in a little bit of disarray.
Yeah, and I think just to provide a little bit more details for the audience, I think there's just so much uncertainty right now regarding, is your hearing going to go forward or is it not? And I think the rule of thumb sort of has to be right now that until you get formal notice it's not going to go forward, no matter what someone tells you at the court, you have to plan as if it is, because we just don't know what's going to happen right now. Well, so we've talked a lot about how you've felt about this process and your perspective on it. How did your clients feel, do you know, about going through this during the pandemic? Was that not an issue for them because they just wanted to proceed? Did they consider that when deciding whether or not to move forward?
Yeah, I'll go with it just real quick. I was probably more concerned than my clients. I think just because they were so anxious to have their day. As I said, it had been 3 years and they were ready. I sent them as soon as I got word from the office that they had a chance, and we only had 6 days notice. I mean, we had been doing a lot of preparation beforehand, but we only had 6 days notice of the interview. And they got back to me within the hour. We're like, yeah, we've discussed it. We want to go. So let's go. And I was like, all right, we're going to do it. And, it definitely worth the risk. But yeah.
Yeah, I almost feel like our client willed the hearing into existence because she was so sure it was going to go forward. And, we talked with her extensively about the fact that she'd be traveling to Chicago during COVID and how she felt about all of that. And I think the other considerations for her outweighed the concerns related to that. I agree with Nick. I think I was a little more worried than my client, and due to sort of the misinformation of the court, I wasn't sure if it was going to go forward, but she was dead. She was certain. I'm positive she willed it into existence.
Anything else you wanted to add, Lisa?
No, nothing else.
So, do you have any recommendations for attorneys who might be interested in taking on an asylum case right now, but just feeling a little overwhelmed by the idea of doing remote client prep or the idea of going into court or the asylum office during this particular time?
I'd say do it. Obviously everyone's comfort level is different, and don't do it if you are, if you have health concerns or whatever the case may be. But if you just have trepidation about the process or not having experience or, doing Zoom prep or stuff like that, I think it'll, as we're all learning, the Zoom prep is working, and we're getting some good results. And, if you don't have experienced attorneys at your firm, Nijc will help. So I think it's a great time to do it. And I think, both our client and it sounds like Nick's client have been, almost all the more grateful now when they're in a time of such uncertainty to have some relief and have some certainty. So I think it's a great time to get involved if you're not already.
Seconded 100%. And Nijc has all the answers, so there's no excuse. In most cases, yeah, it's a little bit of a hurdle to get used to the Zoom and everything, but you're probably doing that for your other work anyway. And at least in the affirmative case, you will probably have more time than you expect to prepare. So more time to overcome those hurdles anyway.
And I'll just add, to Lisa's point, that our client was just so grateful. And, as Ashley said, the administration isn't stopping moving forward with all of this despite a pandemic. And so people still need our help, even though so many parts of the world have just stopped moving. This is still going, and it really is just so rewarding to be able to help some of these people out.
Well, thank you so much to all of you for your insights. I think this is so helpful to attorneys who are thinking of getting involved. We don't have any questions from the audience yet, so we're going to take a little break here and move into listening to some words from Neha and Lisa's client about her experiences. While we're doing that, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to put them into the question or chat box, and we can answer them once the audio is complete.
Yo tuve dos entradas, ¿verdad? Yo vine una vez en el 99. Mi propósito era pedir un asilo y es lo que intenté hacer. Yo tuve una corte, no pude asistir porque yo me enfermé, me dieron una deportación en ausencia. Yo me fui con mis hijas, mi esposo se quedó acá y él iba cada 3 meses a vernos. En 2006 él fue y cuando fue a visitarnos el mes de noviembre a él lo mataron. Mataron al padre de mis hijas y pues ya me quedé sola con mis hijas allá en Honduras. fue muy difícil todo lo que tuvimos que enfrentar, pero Dios estuvo con nosotros. Allá me sentía protegida, no hasta el 2016. Se puso muy difícil la situación en mi país, tocó nuestra familia. Mataron a mi sobrina de una manera terrible porque ella no quiso acceder. Ellos querían que mi sobrina estuviera con ellos. Y se volvió tan terrible, luego puso los ojos de mi hija mayor. Esa fue la razón por la que tuvimos que venirnos. Ya tenía yo prácticamente todo arreglado. Estoy en la casa. Cuando de repente, ¿verdad?, estos tipos entran. Eso fue lo más cerca de la muerte que yo me he sentido en la vida. Me pusieron una pistola en la cabeza. Mandé a mis hijas y yo me vine con ellas. Llegué acá a Estados Unidos, me agarró migración, yo les dije mi caso. Yo tengo por qué luchar, yo tenía una causa. Pero a mí lo que me da es dejar a mis hijas solas. Ellas no tienen a su padre, que la Mara se los quitó. Y yo no quiero morir, no quiero dejarlas solas. Ellas me necesitan aún. $22 meses fueron en el centro de detención. Yo es una bendición haberlos podido encontrar a ustedes, haber podido, ¿verdad?, recibir esa ayuda, porque de no haber sido así, no sé qué hubiera pasado conmigo también. El trabajo que hicieron fue muy alentador para mí. Pues la verdad me tocó estar en la corte con mascarilla, ¿verdad? Y pues es un poco difícil el poder hablar, ¿verdad?, con la mascarilla puesta y estar 5 horas ahí con la mascarilla hablando. Pues estaba llorando y dice ella, se está llorando porque hasta la juez estaba también con su mascarilla. Usted sabe que cuando la gente que viene de esos países tiene una situación muy difícil, ayúdanos a encontrar esa justicia, ayúdanos para que la gente pueda ver todas esas cosas. Hay gente que en verdad necesita ayuda, hay gente que tiene que irse porque no encuentran ayuda.
So we're grateful for Hamina, who is the client of Neha and Lisa, for sharing her experience with us, and hope it provides some additional insight on the importance of representation for asylum seekers, especially right now, given all of the obstacles that the administration has put in their paths. I think we may have a question or two. So the first question, and I'll see if, I think one for Nick and one for Neha and Lisa, it looks like. So for Neha and Lisa, how aggressive were the government attorneys during the cross-examination, and how active was the judge?
Neha, you want to take the first and I'll take the second?
That sounds good. The government attorney was extremely aggressive. It was almost shocking to us how aggressive it was. He started by going through the asylum application, sort of almost page by page. Our client had a lot of back history, as you guys saw in the video. She mentioned that she was detained in Arizona at first, so there was a record from that previous case. There was a record from her interview at that point, and he went through almost page by page through the credible fear interview, through the application, and you know, he did at some points trip her up in terms of the questions he asked were kind of confusing at points, or very broad and very general. The judge kept overruling any objections that I raised to his questioning. And so as a result of sort of these very broad and very ambiguous questions, there were points where I felt the record got a little muddy, because she didn't totally always know what time period he was referring to, or what he was talking about. And he he went into a lot of areas. I mean, the main thing he was focused on was whether there was a reasonable, whether she actually, you know, sort of reasonably reached out to the police, as well as her ability to relocate. And so he went very deep into her work history regarding her ability to relocate, with with her communications to the police. He asked, well, if the the police report or the police in the town weren't helping you, why didn't you go one step above and go to the police in like the county? And just very, very deep questioning like that. And I think that the best advice I can give to attorneys in that situation is, we really tried to empower our client and told her, listen, you haven't been inconsistent. He's going to try to make you feel like you have, and you haven't. And so, you know, stick to your guns. You are right. You have been consistent throughout the years. Don't let him make you feel like you haven't been. And so she felt empowered enough to, when he asked certain questions, to say, no, that's not what I said. This is what I said. And, you know, I make sure, as you're prepping your client for the cross, it's hard to sometimes prep them for those questions, because you feel like the attorney is crossing the line with some of the things they're asking your client. And so, but you just have to ask those questions of them and say, this may be what they ask you, and, you know, work with them to get them to say that, no, that's not what I said. This is what happened. This is how things worked out.
How about the judge? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Lisa.
No, I was going to say, and with the question with respect to the judge, she was not terribly active. There were certain times during the government's cross that she did try to move him along and say, look, I think you've made your point, move on. But as far as sua sponte asking our client questions, she was not active in that respect. Rather, she was trying to encourage the government to essentially give up on his case. So that was a positive. But no, she wasn't asking questions from the bench very much at all.
And had you prepared your client for the type of questioning that she ultimately got?
Yes. So she was ready, and you know, we talked as a team, and a few of the other people we worked with, so lawyers from United, who had been through this experience. One of them was very vocal about making sure, look, the government attorney might be a real jerk, and so you need to be ready for that, and you need to ask her those questions. So we did spend a good amount of time with her, asking her those questions that you feel sort of queasy asking, but a lot of those did come up, and he did in fact ask her those questions, so she was ready.
His cross was almost exclusively, I would say, focused on those elements of her ability to relocate, and then the government's ability or willingness to control the gangs. He thankfully did not really spend too much time at all in, you know, questioning the trauma. It was more focused on the police reports, the police ability to control, and you know, as Neha mentioned, the relocation aspect.
And one thing to add with the judge, it was interesting, the opposing counsel's demeanor was interesting, considering that the judge, when she went on the record, or I think actually maybe it was off the record, she said, I think this is a strong case from the social group from the family social group. And so she had already said up front that she thought it was a strong case. And so it was very interesting that, even given that, opposing counsel still chose to attack those two prongs the way he did.
Well, it sounds like you did a fantastic job preparing her, and these are the exact elements that we do see the government attorneys focusing on so much right now. So I think it's really useful for other pro bono attorneys who may be on this call to know that this is what's happening, and you really have to prepare your client even for more tough questioning than you hope she'll ever have to experience in court itself. Nick, one of the questions we had about the asylum office was if you could explain a little bit about what the shortlist is and how you got on it, and then how long the wait was between when you requested the list and when you got the interview.
Well, for more detailed information, ask an NIJC, because I had never heard of it before. Our interpreter has done a lot of these cases in the Ethiopian community around Chicago, and so had heard of this short list, this cancellation list, and brought it to the attention of the firm. We weren't entirely sure what it was. The original idea was that you sign up for this list if your materials are ready, but you haven't gotten an interview yet. If you really think you're ready to go, haven't filed anything yet, or sent anything yet to the court, none of your affidavits or your letter brief, but if you're ready to go, you sign up for this list, and if there's a cancellation, you will get like short notice that you can take that spot. So that's what we thought it was. We spent a long time thinking about whether to jump on it, and in the interim, we had to deal with the whole country conditions change thing. So it had been in our mind for a long time before we ever actually signed up. We signed up, I think, in March, and by sign up, I mean we just emailed the Chicago office, the Chicago Asylum office, asking to be put on a list. You have to do like a consent to communicate by email, but that was easy. And actually, most of my communications with the office have been really painless. But yeah, so then a few weeks after emailing, we were told that we had, an interview in 6 days, and then we quickly, over the next 2 days, finalized all the materials, sent everything in, and yeah, prepped for the interview, went in, and it went well. But yeah, so I believe it's called just a short notice list, not a cancellation list. But I mean, I still am not 100% clear on the details.
And if there's any pro bono attorneys on the call who are interested in pursuing this with their clients, don't hesitate to reach out to your NIJC point of contact. It is a little illusory. You sometimes get an interview very quickly, and sometimes you wait a year and still don't get an interview. And we're so glad it worked out for your clients, Nick. And if anyone else wants to try, we're happy to talk you through it. All right. Well, thank you again to all of you. I think this was really great and really informative for all of the people who are listening who may be thinking of taking on a case or have a case right now, because everyone wants to know what is really happening at the asylum office or the immigration court. So thank you again. We're just going to move on to some quick comments about how you can get involved, and we'll be done.
Thanks, Ashley.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
All right. So if now at this point you'd like to get more involved, there are a number of ways you can do so. If you would like to become an NIJC pro bono attorney like Lisa, Neha, or Nick, there is a tremendous need for asylum representation right now. Here are 3 clients that NIJC is currently looking for asylum representation for. So if you have some interest in these particular clients, you're welcome to contact us. But we have more than 50 asylum clients right now who are in need of pro bono representation. So this is a huge and significant need that we have. And if you want to get involved, it's quite simple. So there are a number of great opportunities, especially coming up in October, for anyone who wants to learn more about the asylum system or to get involved as a pro bono attorney. Coming up on October 6th, we have our Policy Corner discussion about the ways in which the asylum system is under attack and how you can help defend and respond to these attacks. Following the presentation today, we will also be sending an email to all the attendees that will include information on how you can respond directly to one of the most recent attacks on the asylum and immigration system, which relate to changes that the government wants to make to our immigration court and appellate system. So there'll be some information on how you can specifically respond to that. If you are interested in becoming an NIJC pro bono attorney, or you have a case already, but it's been a year or 2 since you attended a training, we encourage you to sign up for our next virtual training. While remote, we are splitting our training into 2 parts. We have our first part on October 19th, which will provide an overview on asylum law and procedure, and our second part on October 21st, which will take you all the way through working with your client, preparing affidavits, and to the end of presenting your case at the asylum office or the immigration court, like you heard Nick and Neha and Lisa talk about today. If you're interested in exploring our case list or learning more about a particular asylum matter, please don't hesitate to reach out to our pro bono manager, Ellen Miller, and her email address is here and will be circulated in the email that you receive afterwards. And you can always feel free to peruse the resources on NIJC's website at immigrantjustice.org/for-attorneys. If you're interested in becoming an NIJC pro bono attorney, it's not difficult to get started. And as you've heard today, the benefits for asylum seekers and for attorneys are really tremendous. I'm going to quick see if we have any other questions here. We do have a question about whether CLE credit is available for this presentation today. We'll receive more information about that in the email that you receive after the presentation today. So once again, if there are no more questions, we want to give a big thanks to our panelists who provided so much information about their experiences at the court and at the asylum office. We also want to give a huge thanks again to Hamina for sharing her story today. And we have opportunities that you can always check on our calendar linked here. We'd love for you to provide your feedback on today's presentation via the link or the QR code here. And we look forward to connecting with you again soon. Thank you.